What is up, everybody? Welcome to what was going to be a recap of the US's win over Mexico in the CONCACAF Nations League semifinals and has turned into something much larger after reports broke during the game that Gregg Berhalter is coming back to return as manager of the US men's national team. I'm going to talk about the game first and then spend most of this video talking about Berhalter. Just a couple actual points I want to hit on from what happened on the field. First, that was a comprehensive beatdown that is further testament to the job Gregg Berhalter did with this team. There is no other way to frame it. The fact that this is, this team coming out of the World Cup, the fact that BJ Callahan was on Gregg Berhalter's staff and carried that over. Gregg Berhalter deserves some of the credit for what the U.S. did to Mexico last night. The second part, if this team is going to get to where it needs to be, or where it hopes to be, I should say, the emotional maturity has got to be better. And this is a young team. It's still in the process of learning. That's fine. I'm all for Weston McKennie defending his teammates. Serginho Dest standing up for himself. I am not for you getting yourself suspended with a trophy on the line in a game that you were going to win anyway. Because you chose to go put your hand in people's throats and people's faces. That's what the red cards were for. There was no need to do that. You can push people away. You can get involved. Scuffles are going to happen in USA and Mexico. But you got to have the emotional intelligence to not take that next step. I'm going to keep harping on things like this because it is things you can control. And I'm not going to let that get lost in all of the positives and all of the drama of last night. Because now you have two important players who are missing the Nations League final because they let their emotions get the best of them. That is another step this team has to take eventually. And it is something that at times has become an issue. And it simply needs to improve if this team is going to be what it can. And then thirdly, couldn't even finish the game because the chant comes out, it stops once. The chant happens again, the chant happens after that again. I think it was at least 3 times. You could see Matt Turner's disgust. Good on the referee for just ending it. It's infuriating. You got to find a way to stop it. Whatever that takes. Because clearly none of the things that have happened so far are preventing it. So if that means that Mexico starts forfeiting, so be it. And it's not fair to the Mexican players who have tried to put an end to this and obviously are not the ones carrying out this chant. But it's the same thing I was talking about with Vinicius. If you can't get it under control, you have to sacrifice for the greater good. Because there is just no place for that. There is no reason it is still going on. Except for people just insisting for some reason. So good on Matt Turner, good on the referee. Can't even get through stoppage time. I mean, this game was a mess by the end. But it was a comprehensive win. And all that gets overshadowed by the news that reportedly everybody's in agreement Gregg Berhalter is now coming back and it's going to be official soon. I'm sure there will be more times to have this conversation. I'm planning to probably talk about it on the live show Wednesday. But I do want to hit on a couple things and specifically the narrative that's being formed here and push back on it. There's this story being told, and the way this is being framed is that U.S. soccer spent 6 months trying to figure out what to do and then ended up in the exact same place they started. Simply not true. in a very literal sense, of course it's true. But this was not Ernie Stewart and Brian McBride's decision. This was Matt Crocker's decision. 6 months ago, nobody knew who Matt Crocker was. Matt Crocker had no involvement with the U.S. soccer setup at all. And the plan was always to take the time needed to get the sporting director in place and let the sporting director make the decision about the coach. And Matt Crocker interviewed people. Didn't just hand it to Gregg Berhalter. So what you have is a new person who made a decision that the best person to go forward with this team was the former coach. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about right or wrong because the reality is we don't know. I want to talk about the process of this decision at this point. There will be more time to discuss the other aspects of this. This process worked how it was supposed to. You may not like it, but this was the plan. Is it bizarre that it ended up back at Berhalter? Sure. But this idea of what is U.S. soccer doing, why did it take 6 months if this was the plan, is because it wasn't the plan in January and February. Because nobody knew what the plan was because it didn't exist. The plan only started once Matt Crocker was in place. That was the first step, is get your sporting director and let the sporting director make the decision. The second part of this. It became abundantly clear in these past few weeks, and even going back further than that. By and large, this group wanted Berhalter back, and were going to defend him. That goes back to Christian Pulisic talking about how he felt bad for Berhalter because he had to deal with all this childish nonsense. I think Pulisic actually used the word childish in that interview. I saw Christian Roldan make similar comments. I believe Tim Weah spoke out in support of Berhalter recently. You can go down the list. Because that's the other part of this. Anybody criticizing U.S. soccer for this decision, which is fair. I'm not saying you shouldn't be criticizing U.S. soccer or that this is the... I'm not even trying to defend the Berhalter hire necessarily. All I'm saying is we got to frame this correctly. That criticism of U.S. soccer is, by implication, also criticism of these players. Because these players made the choice they wanted Berhalter. You can disagree with them. That is completely fine. But don't separate them from U.S. soccer. This was a collective choice that was made. Christian Pulisic wanted Berhalter. So if you are frustrated and think that U.S. soccer did a bad job by ending up at Berhalter, you are also saying Christian Pulisic is wrong. Which you're entitled to that opinion. But understand that is the implication that comes with the criticism of U.S. soccer. Because Matt Crocker listened to these players. He should have listened to these players because these players were the ones that just dealt with everything that went on at the World Cup. If they still want Berhalter after all of that, you have to take that into consideration. And it's not just you should value the opinion of players. It goes to a whole nother level here. Because Matt Crocker wasn't involved in all of that, and those players were the ones who lived it. If anybody had a right to say, I don't want him back, it's this group of players. Which gets to the third part of this, which is the Gio Reyna factor. My thing from the beginning was the strongest argument that Berhalter should not continue is the fact that he lost the trust of this team when he threw Reyna under the bus. I don't buy the whole he thought it was off the record excuse. I believe it was an honest mistake, and that he wouldn't have said that if he thought it was on the record. But that in itself does not kind of explain away the damage that was done and the lack of trust and the awful mistake that it was. That was my thing that I could not get over personally. But clearly this group has. And what that says about their relationship with Gio Reyna, I don't know. But now you have a situation where they got to find a way to work together. If you're hiring Berhalter, you're saying that this is going to be fine with Reyna because no coach is important enough to jeopardize, in my opinion, your most technically gifted player, who is also, going to be here for 2 more World Cups, probably. At least. And nearly won his team the Bundesliga with what he did coming off the bench in his last appearance for Borussia Dortmund last season. Gregg Berhalter is not worth jeopardizing that relationship for. So clearly, they feel like they're going to find a way to make this work. I will push back on a lot of the criticism of Berhalter when it comes to the actual job he did on the field. Because to me, there was a lot more good than bad. Certainly, there is some room for criticism, but you also got to give the man a lot of credit. Where I said I don't see how he continues is this part of it. The relationship aspect, the cultural aspect, the how do you just go on together after all of this had happened. The easiest way was just to clean house and start over. And U.S. Soccer was doing that until Gregg Berhalter is now back. And then lastly, the other thing I want to get to here. I was not particularly pleased with the conversation that went on during halftime with the Paramount Plus crew when all of this broke. A lot of it is the way it was framed, and I explained most of that so far. The other thing, though, was Charlie Davies essentially suggesting that Gregg Berhalter, and this is me reading a little bit into and kind of extrapolating what he said, but essentially that Gregg Berhalter is back as the coach because U.S. Soccer didn't have the money to hire a higher profile men's manager because of the CBA and the agreement with the women's team where everything is supposed to be equal. One, this is not a conversation about the women's national team. Don't bring them into this. Two, if you're going to say that, you better be able to back it up. And my immediate reaction was Charlie Davies must know something because I think he's a really smart guy. I've got a lot of respect for him. That he must know something that he is really confident to start making that kind of implication. And I saw today that Jonathan Tannenwald, one of the top soccer reporters in this country, works for the Philadelphia Inquirer, basically said, from what he understands, Davies is wrong. You can't go saying that kind of stuff if you can't back it up factually. But more, on top of that, Jose Mourinho and Pep Guardiola are not the only options outside of Gregg Berhalter. Because Davies was kind of framing it in this, maybe some of these guys, and specifically Mourinho or Pep, will come for $15 million, but U.S. Soccer isn't going to offer them $15 million. So what do you do then? And that might be true. Jose Mourinho is not worth $15 million for this team right now. I don't want more chaos. We've dealt with that enough. Pep Guardiola is a different conversation. Pep Guardiola also is not taking over this team right now. It's not happening. But he completely missed the boat with the other options that just weren't discussed in that conversation. Jesse Marsch. You're not paying Jesse Marsch $15 million a year. Never in a million years would that be part of the conversation if you were to have hired him. Patrick Vieira, this week, is telling somebody he wants this job because that was all you were hearing is that Patrick Vieira is interested. Thierry Henry. You also heard that for a little while there. And clearly he wants to manage again, and I think he would have taken this job. You got options out there. It is not this finite thing where it was Jose Mourinho or Pep Guardiola or Gregg Berhalter. So I'm not going to get into was this the right decision, because, like I said earlier, we don't know. Today is not that time. There'll be more opportunities to discuss this. But the framing of all of this, to me, has just been so poor. That's what I want to focus on, is the process part. Because I don't... Is it just simply that people don't want Berhalter and that's where the criticism is coming from? Because to me, it's very easy to understand how the last 6 months went. There was no rush because you wanted to make sure you got the interest and talk to whoever you needed to at the end of the European season. And then you make your decision. And that's what happened. It's not like U.S. Soccer changed course halfway through this. It was just a decision that nobody expected to be coming. That's a different conversation about whether it was the right decision. But the U.S. Soccer doesn't know what it's doing, and U.S. Soccer got this wrong. Not the same thing. There are plenty of reasons to say that this is not a good idea and U.S. Soccer got this wrong. I don't see a lot of argument that U.S. Soccer doesn't know what it's doing. And if this wasn't Berhalter, does the conversation play out the same way? Because there is just this toxicity connected to him for reasons I don't entirely understand. So just keep this in the proper context. This was Matt Crocker's decision, and the players were on board with it. If you have an issue with this decision, you are also saying, I don't like the players' judgment and the way the players feel, because they wanted Berhalter back. I don't know how Gio Reyna is feeling. I'm just kind of removing him from that part of the conversation, because just about everybody else went out of their way to not just say nice things about Gregg, but to actually go to bat for him. That has to mean something. And you can't detach that from the process U.S. Soccer went through, because it was a foundational part of it. You're going to have a hard time convincing me that U.S. Soccer and Matt Crocker would have hired Gregg Berhalter against the wishes of this team. That if Pulisic and whoever else went in there, Matt Turner, Weston McKennie, and said, we don't want him back, that the Federation would have said, too bad, he's coming back anyway. After everything that's happened. It's the opposite. I don't see a way in which Berhalter gets this job if he doesn't have such strong support from his players. So you can't separate those two either. It is all part of how this played out. So now we wait for the official announcement, probably a press conference at some point. All that I'm assuming will be coming soon in the next couple days since this is leaked. Then you can have a different conversation, and I plan to revisit this to be determined in kind of what form that is and how much I revisit it. But that is the part I wanted to focus on today, was the process and the way that this is being framed improperly. That's all I've got. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you next time.